Okay, it's timely in terms of the topic I'm going to talk about, because we know that the sustainability standard environment and context has been moving a lot lately. Just a preface, I'm not going to go directly into that, but I will definitely discuss that towards the end of my presentation or throughout. Admittedly, this is also a talk I gave a few times already, in person and online. This is, I would call it, as a very critical perspective on sustainability, and also to try to redefine and remind ourselves what do we mean or we don't mean by sustainability and ESG. So the title is provocative because I feel like it has also some meaning into it, that this is how I feel about sustainability, that it has been kind of hijacked by some of the actors in the field. So I'll get started. So just this is not about how great things I did. It's just to outside the regular academic work I do, publishing and teaching at the university. These are things that I've done outside the university, being involved in, as Tam mentioned, a Center for Social and Long-Term Research, but also with a CPA Canada profession recently with a competency map on sustainability, and also even a few years before, I was on some committee for Academic Network for Integrated Reporting, the rating system back in 2008 when it started, with the Global Responsible Leadership, with the European Accounting Association. I'm still on the Stakeholder Reporting Committee. Just to say that I'm also bringing a bit of a practice perspective as well. It's not a purely academic talk. It is not a paper per se. Just to give you a background and that should help the talk as well. So this is not a paper, as I mentioned. Okay, maybe I should write something at some point, a blog or something. But it's different from a seminar, and I will do some academic, insights, but I will also connect with practice as well. And you may have heard these before. Some of the things are online already, YouTube. So I can also remain quite passionate and ranting at times. So don't give me, I can get really excited to talk about this. So just bear that in mind. So I'm gonna take a bit of a historical view perspective by citing what my good friend and colleague and co-author, long-time co-author, Dan Patton has done in 2013. He kind of described the history of sustainability accounting research in general in terms of waves. And this is not obviously we're not talking about like COVID wave. Is not a good word, but he actually used his word 10 years ago, that there was a first wave of research in accounting that people are mostly not aware of for some reason, that in the 1960s and 70s, there was already research published in accounting journals about human resource, about the social effect and the measurement issues of social effect, and even CSR, corporate social responsibility, were already part of the topic. Admittedly, they were on the fringe, on the margin, right? They were not, and this probably explains why this has for a long time become a kind of a marginal topic in the accounting literature. So that's just to show that this is not a new topic at all. The second wave, as he describes, over time, so it has developed over some more variable to measure, like regression-wise or correlation, or how does the market react to CSR information, right? And you can see even 1978, 1980, 83, you have these authors who have examined how does the capital market reacts to CSR information, or how the user perceive CSR information, right? The user who could be investor, but also just from the broader public. I know that the one I put it last, show it out for the none, is not from that second wave, but this is also one of the rare, well, maybe more needed research on doing experiments and looking at how this reporting, how this sustainable information is perceived or used by readers, right? And then there was a whole lot of literature on the relation between environmental performance and financial performance. The famous question of does it pay to be green, kind of thing, right? So when companies perform better environment or do invest in environmental initiative, do they do better or worse financially? And that's a question that's been asked hundreds of times in many journals and authors and field, even in management, they do that. The question is, it's really not really answered, although there is, of course, some business case argument that says, well, a company, when they do good things, green things, socially responsible things, it usually pays off. But then there's also literature that says the opposite. So it really, it's kind of a still going on question, but it started again in the 1970s and 80s. Okay, now there's also, then this is still from Dan's description, right? Because he looked at the overview historically, that he talks about a ripple. So somewhere in the 1990s, so the next kind of decades, there was a ripple that focused a lot on environmental issues specifically. Okay, so to almost the detriment of social issues, right? So there was a lot of studies that look at environmental performance captured in market valuation, firm valuation, or market reaction study with a disaster that himself and Blaconier did in '94 of the big disaster and how does it react, environmental disaster in Bhopal in India, and then how does the market react, environmental liability disclosure, environmental costing. So you see that has speculation. 1992, the Rio meeting about environment could have fueled the interest on environment. And also, that's when people start talking more about the environmental issues of corporations and business, etc. So that may be related to that. And then in the 2000, there's what he calls a new wave, and that is where also I joined him to write a piece later about it, about this new wave, or the third wave, if you want, where suddenly there is a reappearance of mainstream CSR accounting research that kind of reappears in journals. And this is also largely due, we believe, because standalone CSR reports were coming out like crazy at that time, right? Today, it's a kind of a obvious thing, but back then it was not like huge, like today, every company is issuing standalone CSR reports. It was kind of a new thing, right? So the last 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that started coming. And this is where we believe that this kind of research has kind of reappeared. And also from the fact that it became kind of a quote unquote cool thing to study as well. And we take a bit of a critical view, and we call it like this rediscovery, because as you can see, it is nothing to rediscover. This research was existing 40 years ago. Okay, so it's a bit of an ironic statement to say, well, the wake up and discovery of this research by mainstream accounting researchers who clearly didn't really care back then, who clearly didn't really publish those studies, only very few, marginalized the research. But since the 2000 and 2010, I will show you, it has become a boom. Like it has completely exploded to the point where today you cannot really even go to a conference without seeing ESG everywhere, and which I'll get to. So this is really a phenomenon that has happened starting in 2000, 2010-ish, right? So these are some examples that came up around that time. So you have the accounting review, who had a special issue, a special section that talk about so CSR. And then you have another one in auditing, and in Journal of Accounting Economics 2013, organized a conference with Harvard Business School. So you're talking about like these kind of prestigious journals, prestigious schools that get into this topic. More recently, during COVID, it was a review of accounting studies. The focus you can see, you can read on the screen, ESG and CSR. Then there's this conference, Center for Accounting Research Education. The theme of the conference in 2021 was Accounting for Sustainability and Responsible Investing. The China Accounting and Finance Review Conference again. And this is just a few examples. I think today more than ever, there are so many sustainability/ESG conference in the world that have a very different kind of quality and different perspectives on what it is. So this has become a phenomenon that has snowballed and that has completely gone a bit crazy. Something that we note is the research topic that is being published in those journals. So there's a reporting, of course, lots of report research, some geographic employee, some anti-corruption study. Then you have some more general topics such as investing. Moser and Martin, I will get to that, did a little editorial on research opportunities, but it was a bit of a controversial piece. I will show you why. Shareholder activism as well. And then you have these new things that you go to these mainstream conferences, but you see a paper that will talk about correlation between ESG and something financial, right? So now we have this new variable because you can get it from this database, Bloomberg and MSCI Analytics or whatever, like these huge companies that sell you this data, like they sold financial data, now they're going to sell you ESG data, and they will have this regression, this correlation, this association, looking at ESG and something that hasn't been done. So in the name of it hasn't been done, this is new and interesting. Well, sometimes it's really not, and sometimes it doesn't make much sense. But there's so many. I come from different conferences in Europe, in the US, I mean, I'm sure in Australia, everywhere in the world, you're going to have this. Okay, so this is the kind of the status of research right now. I was a bit at the EAL in May. My good friend Torst, he actually quoted me. He said, "Charles, he's the angry man. He was angry at the time, and I was angry. Yes, I was angry, and I wrote this piece from a very a critical perspective as well. You say that these new wave researchers are addressed to them. You need to either step up to the plate, and I'll tell you why I said that, or stay out of the game." Okay, and I'll tell you in summary why exactly I said. But if you want to take a look at this quite short piece, an essay piece of why, that says the thing. So during COVID as well, we all like locked down or whatever, and I wrote this. The major concerns, which is part of that piece as well, but it was already highlighted with Dan in 2013 with another essay, is that the view of sustainable reporting from those kind of researchers, there is no outside the box, there's no skepticism, everything is a functional view of how great sustainable reporting is, how truthful and how it helps capital markets, basically, right? And it could have a negative impact on actually addressing sustainable issues. So we already had this in mind. Again, related to that, the focus on this research was very much so on markets and investor interest, right? How does CSR information, or how does, now we call it ESG, right? How is it going to affect my investments? How is it going to invest the markets? How is it going to affect my business? That's really what mainstream accounting do when they do CSR accounting research, right? And so we kind of argue that it can only hinder the ultimate development of better accounting disclosure for all of the impacts of business. And we see that today. I'll get into the new ISSB standards, that we knew that this is a very wrong start of looking at sustainable reporting this way, which is basically, let's look at what are the social and environmental issues in the world that will affect the market value of my investment, right? That's pretty much all they care about. And then the second issue is that there is absolutely no research review, literature review, or references or citation, or the body of research that existed, as Dan showed 40, 50 years ago. I calls it selling old wine in new bottles, right? It's the same thing, except you just label it differently and you publish it in different journals, and it becomes a problem. It's not very scholarly. It's not that they don't know about it, because Moser and Martin are the ones who wrote this editorial, as I told you, controversial editorial in the Accounting Review back in 2012. And they acknowledge, look what they say. In the piece, they say, of course, there are many other earlier CSR studies published in the Accounting Review and many other accounting journals. We do not cite such papers because this commentary is not intended to provide a review of prior CSR work, but rather to comment on how accounting researchers might consider a broader perspective when studying CSR issues. Doesn't make absolutely no sense, this sentence, right? You are actually providing a review of or comment on how accounting researchers could have a broader perspective. But if you don't support it based on prior research, how do you actually make an improvement, right? And this ended up in a footnote, very small footnote, probably because one of the reviewers asked him to put it, But this is what you call unscholarly, right? You just dismiss 40, 50 years. And we're not saying that you should cite every single paper there, of course not. But when you don't cite a single one and you write a piece like nothing existed before yours, to me, it's completely against proper scholarship, right? So to me, that's like one prime example of how the literature has been ignored. Okay, so that's the academic part that I was kind of, well, you can already see I'm kind of half ranting, but there is also some things that happened in practice kind of recently about what, for example, sustainable finances or sustainable accounting. Ernst & Young, Big Four firm, how business can become the guardians of climate and sustainability. So the financial institutions today, they started a few years ago, that they feel they have a role in there. And I'm not arguing that they don't, but I'm not sure they know what they're really talking about here. And Bank of America, a couple of years ago, says they deploy $1 trillion for sustainable finance by 2030. You can define sustainable finance many ways, but I'm not sure they, one, know really what it is, and two, that it's the right way to address planetary sustainable issues, right? And the most telling thing that I found also back then during the hype of this big financial institution is this interview by Tarek Fancy, who was the chief investment officer of what? Of BlackRock. BlackRock is the largest asset management firm, and he was the heading the impact or sustainable investment office. He was one of the, I think he was a chief officer, so he was on the C-suite or at least close to that. And he resigned, and he said, these are some quotes from the interview he did. He gave many interviews, but that was one of the first ones. And he said, basically, I quickly learned that ESG is not as useful to investing as I had hoped. Acting responsibly is not as profitable as advertised. Moreover, going through the investment process is a bizarre place to create social impact in the first place, right? So he doesn't understand how they could reconcile this investment with a social impact and investment process. And investment professionals are like any other competitive athletes. They're trained to chase yield and profits. They never lost this goal of the bottom line, we make as much profit as possible. And he said the vast majority of our work at BlackRock helped the bottom line. So they were doing good financially, but did not show any demonstrable positive impact on society. And the last one, which is kind of where I'm introducing what's really a problem here, is that there was almost no social impact. And he wondered, could sustainable investing, and remember I put in red, the narrative, the discourse, the talk about around it, could be harming the world by creating a societal placebo that delayed government reforms. Basically saying that maybe there's the hype around it, the talk of the narrative around it, made it that we're gonna kind of, I quote somebody from my MBA guest lecture, are we drinking the Kool-Aid here and everything is good because we have something about ESG going on? Well, we're really addressing the problem, right? So this narrative thing is exactly what myself and many other scholars in the area have been studying, discourses and analysis, right? So before I get to that, I will do a quick parenthesis. Again, you can see I'm a big fan of he's not retired now, but Dan Patton. He did a wonderful keynote at the CISA conference many years ago, and he wrote this piece about it. And I'm going to show you the analogy he makes you talk about sustainable reporting and kind of the illusion, right? That's why I call it in the previous slide, the danger of hype, illusion, and false optimism. This is really well illustrated. We're talking about white tigers and zoos. So what is he talking about here? So even when he was started talking about it, I was like, what is he going to say? So he actually wrote this piece based on, after reading this non-academic piece at all. It's about white tigers. It's nothing to do with business or economy. It's a novel fiction. But in short, you have the white tigers here. You have seen some white tigers on TV or maybe in real in Las Vegas or somewhere. And you should be aware that, I didn't know this, but They could be considered the stars of the animal because they're so beautiful, but they are not an endangered species. They are not even a species at all. They are genetic mutants. Because why? Because the only way to get white tigers is to have incestuous mating. Okay, I know it's a little bit not so pretty to imagine, but you can artificially produce white tigers by doing that, right? So now you have this animal which is really a creature of a artificial association between two tigers from the same bloodline because of the biological effect. And so be careful of considering that, wow, these are like, and these were high market value. These were hyped around it. At some point, they were going for $60,000-$80,000 a piece. It was a business of selling these white tigers all over the world. So, the confusion between saying, oh, but these poor animals are endangered species. Well, no, they're not species. They're nice, but maybe, but they're not. They're really not a species. But the even more striking analogy makes is also with zoos, right? So here I put some pictures of zoos, and you can see that. Yeah, we can argue all day long that zoos, they are bringing the nature to the city, for example. Like people like, for example, me who live in downtown Toronto, but we have a zoo somewhere here. I've never been there, but yeah, you can have this illusion that the zoos is going to have, bring whatever city people cannot get from the nature, from the jungle, from whatever animals that they can bring in. But you know that there's a problem with this, right? Because you know that these animals are not supposed to be in a zoo, right? So in the novel, he quotes Quayman, the novel of the zoos of Cincinnati, the white tiger of Cincinnati. So, like many nature documentaries on TV, zoos may actually undermine the continued existence of what they purport to celebrate. So he's basically saying you could have the opposite effect of what a zoo is supposed to do, because people watch movies, films, they visit the zoos, and by this kind of magic power, this really vicarious experience, they kind of unconsciously start to believe that this tiger, Bengal tiger, or this rhino, or this panda, or this sifaka is alive and well because they have seen it. Right? They went to the zoo, they saw it, they was like, well, they're doing good. Unconsciously, you may think that. Well, I'm sorry, but they haven't seen it. They have seen images. Zoos are not fragments of the world of nature. No, they are substitutes, which means it's a fake. Okay, it's a replacement just to compensate for the fact that you don't get to see. And actually, pretty selfish actually, because it's like, oh, I'm happy because I've seen a panda, okay, in the city, But what's the connection with sustainable reporting? Well, basically, when ESG or sustainable reporting is going crazy, proliferate around the world, is that like people who see these white tigers and the zoo, that because they have kind of seen it and they think that all is well in the world, the fear is that sustainable reporting would be seen as, oh, well, there's a lot of buzz around it, a lot of talk about it, so it must be doing good, because we have now the standards coming up, we have now this initiative, and everybody's doing ESG stuff. So people will go, oh, he's taken care of. And that's kind of the fear he had 10 years ago. 10 years ago, he said that, and even before. And because we know that we have still a very long way to go, even the reporting practices, despite the standards, which I will talk about in a minute, are problematic. We are far from that, right? So that's kind of the analogy I was trying to bring, because I think it fits well with the fact that the risk of having people believe that things are going okay in the world because there's so much buzz around it, and it's wrong. So now I'm going to show you some other example, some of my own research like that's getting a bit older, but this is things that I've studied myself with other co-authors, obviously, about language and words, the narrative. Remember when Tarek Fancy is talking about maybe all this buzz and this wording and this discourse? Yeah, that's what the causing the issue. Yeah, well, we analyze language, we analyze if the action and the words are more important. So in some other studies, such as this one, there is a team of Danish researchers who looked at 40,000 CSR reports. I'm talking about CSR reports over 13 years. Okay, so that's a lot of reports. And all they did part of their research was, let's look at whether these companies refer to any kind of limits. Because you know that Anthropocene issues, environmental issues are, touted because of these finite resource, limited resources. we have limits, right? We have these resources issues in the world, and only 5% of them actually even talk about ecological limits, and of that, only 0.26% talked about how they're gonna address those issues. So you're talking about a CSR report that barely talks about anything about ecological limits, and then even less so when they talk about it, how they're gonna address it. So it's a big problem in terms of rhetoric to sort of talk about, yes, we have this corporate responsibility report and strategy and all that stuff, but then we don't talk about the ecology, right? So that's one example as well. You highlight those here. And then there is this narrative about materiality. Everybody talks about materiality today in accounting. So they have this essay that they wrote about the word that launched 1,000 debates, and today is still true. So words do matter, and the way you label things, and I'll get to that when we talk about the ISSB, that the way you call things, it matters, okay? The form over substance or substance over form, yes, we can argue that, but the form matters, right? So, and then we have the way we package things around the last few years, the coin terms ESG, right? So what is ESG? Because back then there was no such thing as ESG. I mean, it was not labeled like that, right? And I'm going to make a little. I found that on the on some social media network here that everybody's doing ESG so much that the fastest things on Earth, you have the cheetah that runs super fast, the airplane, the light, and then you have people who become experts in ESG. Every day there's a bunch of people who suddenly becomes specialists in ESG. Okay, and it's kind of a joke, but not really. It's kind of true that it's growing fast. And one of the danger of that is also that people are kind of not very qualified to be expert in ESG. I'm sorry. Just because today, if it's your first time listening to me and you listen to webinar and you say, I'm an ESG expert. I mean, I hope you don't do that, but some people would listen to, because there's so many webinars they say about sustainability and ESG, and you go to one and you go, oh yeah, okay, now I'm an expert. So I change my business card and become an ESG expert, right? So that's a problem. Because of that, also education in school. So I don't know how your universities respectively do that, but I know in mine, I'm lucky, and this is one of the reasons I moved, that we take this very seriously, and we have actually now classes, and some of them, one of them is actually mandatory for the MBA. But over the world, you can see in Ireland, you can see even the US, even Cornell, or no, what is it? Yale. Yale is doing this, but many schools. So it's huge demand, right? But you also have the big four who had this bandwagon, right? Jump on the bandwagon. Like, it's a Financial Times article, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. Big four accounting firms rush to join the ESG bandwagon. They even call that bandwagon, which is like, it's either a bit of a fashionable thing that big four are jumping into this because this expression FOMO, fear of missing out, right? So so now they're like, oh wow, everybody's doing this, so we better get onto these ESG things, right? So and then you have, going back to these ESG experts going, there was a piece by this, I can't remember his name, but it was a nice article to really warn about the risk of competence greenwashing, which is you actually portray yourself as an ESG expert, but you're not. And this is a risk, because now you have people who are not qualified, who are not competent, who are going to label themselves as ESG something, which I put some potential title here, and then they're going to advise on people on the wrong things, right? So everybody today can be an ESG manager, ESG consultant, ESG auditor, ESG VP if you want, chief. I mean, everything is ESG. It's more like, I'm an ESG something. What are you, kind of thing? It's a cool thing to have this ESG in the title, and it's pretty scary to see how people can, kind of abuse that, that title, and it's kind of a political imposter, right? I mean, it's like, seriously, I can call him that, because we have people who have zero clue about what ESG really means, or even sustainability, but they have these positions, they have these titles. And this article is like, this is the next risk for the ESG industry, because now you're going to populate all these people and you're going to take ESG to the wrong direction. And it's already kind of on the way, so unfortunately. Okay, so this is kind of the way I look at the ESG landscape today. You have the risk of this fashionable thing, you jump on the bandwagon, competence, greenwashing, etc. Okay. And then this is kind of where I'm getting to that hijacking part, where there was an article that so some colleagues published, namely with Professor Eccles, the difference between purpose and sustainability. And honestly, up to that, if you stop there, it's not a bad article. I mean, you can make a distinction between what is purpose-driven corporation or purpose-driven strategy and sustainability. Okay, but the key word was they put AKA, also known as ESG, which implied that they consider that sustainability and ESG are the same thing. And that triggered a lot of controversial debates, a lot of pushback. Up to today, there is, I believe, that people are mistaking what sustainability is with ESG. ESG is a short word, a cool acronym, easier to pronounce than sustainability, mouthful word, ESG. No, and I'm going to show you why it's not the same, okay? And this is where the risk, the danger I see of having this misconception of what sustainability means, right? So here were some comments. So not my comments, I just copied and pasted on LinkedIn post, and you can see that some people are quite violent, like, sustainability, what? I'm not gonna say it, but Bob, confusion seems to reign in you and your colleague at Harvard, this editorial board, on the distinction between incrementalist ESG and normative sustainability. The GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative co-founder, says ESG does not by nature carry a true sustainability gene. It cannot be the same because they're not designed the same way. They're not born. It's not the same DNA. And another comment was, what? Sustainability, AKA ESG? Oxford, Harvard, because that's where they come from. They have this privilege, right? You guys need to get up to speed. Okay. Another comment. Sustainability and ESG are not the same thing. Is there not enough confusion already, right? And then this one is quite telling because it gives you an example. Thanks, Robert. This is good, but ESG and sustainability are not the same thing. For instance, BAT, the British Tobacco, Glencore, Coke, they got high ESG score from these providers, but we know that they are not sustainable. How come you have a high ESG score, but we know that companies like even oil and gas companies, sometimes they get high ESG score? Clearly tells you that ESG is disconnected from sustainability, right? What does it really mean, right? So these are the comments that I found on the public space. This is a couple years ago, and today is still going on, even more so that they still have this problem. From my end, I just decided that I'll make it simple and I'll come up with some keywords that are kind of related to sustainability. So for me, simple, sustainability, from a planetary perspective, accountability, environment, responsibility, planet, as I mentioned, biodiversity, social. The things that really matter in our life, like the planet we live in, the society, environment, that's sustainability, right? But ESG on the other hand is impact, materiality, risk and opportunities, investors, integration. And I'll give you some example. One example of our dear Royal Bank of Canada, which, like many other banks, or most banks, they also got into these investment approaches of ESG, right? They're integrating ESG into their investment to advise their clients. So they kind of explain what different types of investment, traditional to social responsible, to impact, to philanthropy, blah, 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 okay? And then they talk here about the risk. And this is exactly what it is, ESG risk management. And if you really look at the description of each, almost at no point they really talk about, yes, we're gonna, this investment is going to try to address planetary issues. No, this investment is going to give you a better, safe return because we're gonna mitigate the risk of climate issues, something like that, right? This is kind of what ESG is about, is how companies are going to manage risk of climate issues, which, by the way, that they created to affect the investment, right? And in terms of materiality, or in terms of direction, it's more like the outside in direction rather than inside out. They're not going to address the impact that they make on the environment, but how the environment is going to make impact on them, right? And this is kind of done by also I know Bob Willard did a very simply, very easy to understand diagram. Say, okay, sustainable reporting is addressing the impact of the business on society environment, like this way, these arrows, Where ESG disclosure is how is the risk caused by environment and society going to affect the business, right? So if you only focus on this, it's called single materiality, material for the business. Okay. Here is when you put both together, that's why people talk about double materiality. It's material for the business, but also is material for society and the environment, right? That's the piece missing today of this sustainability standard of inside out, outside in. This is the part missing, is outside in, right? How is inside out is missing, like missing the part that how does the company, the organization, going to address the impacts they create, the negative externalities and all the impact they create, and how they're going to disclose? Well, that part is not mandatory now, okay? It's not part of the standard. So that's what's missing. And so if we look at materiality, and I'll say a few words of materiality, but this is kind of what I just talked about, right? The single financial materiality, value to business, versus double materiality, which is the value to society. And all of these letters you see here, it's a complex environment to navigate through. Call it the alphabet soup of all kinds of either standards or regulations or frameworks or cap models or whatever you see. But you can see clearly here on the left side that those organizations and those actors, those stakeholders who are very pro support of financial materiality is the IFRS Foundation, which I'll talk about, which is now kind of with a SASB, which, you know, they have all these agreements to join forces or whatever. You're not going to even keep track of what they do, but they kind of get together. The CDSB as well. And then on the other side, you have these the GRI, which is the oldest standard, at least the guidelines and standard, and more traditional, although they have, you know, shifted, you know, over time, back and forth. But there's, you know, and in Europe, EFRAG, in Europe, he's counterbalancing this aspect. As like, double majority is important. So it's kind of a bit of I look at it from outside, like this is a political game, right? This is a bit of a battle between two perspectives, etc. So just a quick word on materiality, right? Materiality is, in accounting terms at least, you know, if you take it put simply, something that may affect your decision, that will affect your decision, important enough, so that's material, so that is relevant enough, important enough, so that it could and it will make a difference in your decisions, right? So generally in financial terms, you would think something over 5% of your gross sales or size or assets, or below that could be considered immaterial, you know, because even if we are not sure about this account, or we you know, there's a problem there, it's only 2%, 5% of that, right? Now, you translate that into social issues, sustainability issues, and you say, well, you know, we have a workforce of 300,000 employees and 40 people have died on the job. So that's like 1%. So immaterial? Okay, so 30 people died, but it's only 1%. So should we report that or not? Well, under materiality issues, if you just going to for only material issues to be reported, well, those 30% would never be, 30 people who died would never be reported, right? Because they'll say it's a material. Okay, and that's the risk that we run when you apply financial-based model to non-financial based model like that. You're talking about not dollars anymore, you're talking about human lives here, people who have died. You're talking about environmental land, protected land has been destroyed. Oh yeah, but it's only like 3% of the whole. Well, you have burnt or destroyed this land. So it's a very dangerous thing to take a financial model, financial mindset, to apply to sustainability or non-financial mindset, right? Just a word of materiality. So, and of course, so you saw everything, right? But look at all of this alphabet soup. It's hot. This is sustainability at its best. You can get lost in this, right? I mean, just give you a picture. Somebody said, is sustainability easy? There we go. It's a very complex environment between rating agency, between frameworks, between standards, between funding, between consultants, all that, right? So so I'll get on to now the case of and finish on that, on the IFRS Foundation and the system reporting. So I know that today it's a huge thing, right? It was the purpose, but it was about 3 years ago, September 2020.
Hi, Sean.
Yes.
Yeah, before you go further for the IFRS standard, there's a question about the difference between sustainability and ESG. Do you want to talk about it now or later?
I'm almost done. So
Okay.
how much time do we have? Like 90 minutes total, right?
Let me see the time.
I saw it's a
yeah, you still have 10 more minutes.
Yeah, I can finish in 10 minutes, and I'll really go back to the question. I think it's
okay. Yeah.
more
Yeah.
effective.
Thank you.
So this is the case in 2020 that the IFRS Foundation, which is the overseeing ISB, the International Accounting Standards, came up with this consultation paper on sustainability standard. Now, I would like to note that before that, there was almost nothing that IFRS Foundation really does or cares about sustainability standard. They were really good at this financial reporting standard, right? International Financial Reporting Standard. And they came up with this paper in 2020 to ask a consultation about the possible formation of this separate board called the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, in addition to the International Accounting Standard, the ISB. And so they asked for comment, and when you read that paper, it's still available. Honestly, there's a lot of problem with this paper, right? It was not a very long paper. It was less than 20 pages. They defined different things. They forgot a lot of things. So I ended up writing my own comment letter, and I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I highlighted 4 issues, right? That the definition of sustainability, which I kind of talked about here, with the talking about sustainability as it was just a business sustainability, right? Not a planetary sustainability. And so I mentioned kind of the example I gave just now about the materiality issue, about who is important to, but they, like the other study we saw, they never even mentioned ecology or planet and society in this whole report. So they want to create a sustainability standard board, but there was no such things as, they don't talk about these planet, societal issues, environmental, ecological issues. No. Then they also define stakeholder. They talk about stakeholder, but we really only talk of one stakeholder, which is the investor. They don't really talk about the other stakeholders, such as employees, customers, suppliers, governments, NGOs, civil society. No, none of that, right? And about materiality, which I kind of went ahead and also gave that example, but this is exactly what I was saying. Materiality has become a key rationalization for immoral activity. It means like you could put things under the carpet in the name of materiality, because if I have 1,000 child labor or 50 deaths and they represent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the companies, should they report that or not? Well, technically it's immaterial, so you don't report it. So we're never going to talk about this child labor or 50 deaths, because it's not material, right? And then the last issue I had is that they ignored, and it's not surprising, just like the other academics, the third wave, the new wave, they just didn't even bother citing or bringing the research from before, or 50 years of research that was provided. So to me, it was a very poorly written letter. But of course, it was a way to justify that they have asked so many people, because they got over 500, almost 600 letters. Most of them kind of supported, because everybody's happy about that, because they don't really see the danger of sustainability. And 3 years down the road, quick fast forward, they got it. In between, they have of course, in March 2021, yes, we got the feedback. But what's really striking here is that they actually put the word public interest and value creation for investor in the same sentence. Like, this is the public interest for them, right? The trustee recognize the importance of public interest. Therefore, we're going to make sure that investor get the value. That's for them such a narrow mindset, that public interest is about investors. That was, to me, striking. And of course, they decided that exactly what a lot of people were against: investor focus for enterprise value, right? Meeting information needs of investors only. And then in 2021, at the COP conference Glasgow, they announced the board. Surprise, surprise. And then the board was formed. And even then, okay, I'm just going to keep on, because they just kept repeating that, yes, it is investor focus, it is investor focus. And they also justify, but there was a demand. But there was a demand by financial markets only, right? The demands come from investors, right? So all this to say, and of course, this is the author of that paper, who is very pro ISSB, who said this is why this is so important to the capital markets. And he said it. It's important to only one particular segment of the population, which is the capital markets, right, the investors. So needless to say, just to fast forward now in 2023, 2 weeks ago, the official standards from the ISSB, S1 and S2 have been issued, and along the lines of investor focus standards. So you can take a look at them and you can see that that's really about risk management standards. And Bill Bowie was the one who said, suggested that, you know, instead of ISSB, what you're doing is actually pretty good. He said he applauded for moving the ball forward on standardizing ESG progress reporting. How about you don't call it ISSB, the first S of sustainability, you call it IESGSB. You are the International ESG Standard Board. Because remember what I told you, how you call things matters. By calling yourself International Sustainability Standard Board, you are misleading the population, the public, that you are actually doing something for sustainability, and you're not. So on one hand, what they've done is actually useful for markets. You have to admit that they've done a lot of work to make standards consistent, comparable, whatever they want, because the market participants are more comfortable looking at this disclosure. But that's it. There's no help. There's no other things for the planet here, right? So he just went on and he said that IFRS, IRC, the integral reporting, SASB, the Sustainable Accounting Standard Board, and the CDSB have never had any intention to make any contextualization within threshold, which means like the context-based sustainability, with taking into account more than market issues, right? Market concern. They have always been about incrementalist movement on environmental, social governance factors, and actually they was opposed to that, right? So I really follow Bill. I recommend that you follow. He does really pointed posts on LinkedIn, also writes some nice blogs and articles. Actually, I met Bill a long time ago, so he's a great thinker and writer and speaker. And so I just quote him because I think he was totally right. I'm so aligned with saying, he's like, the ISSB is not about sustainability, right? So with that, I will end. I know there's a list of questions, but I'm happy to take. And you can reach me if you want to engage and talk. I'm quite accessible via LinkedIn and Twitter and email. So here we go. So thank you very much again for your attention. And I'm completely available for any questions and comments you may have. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Chart. It's very interesting for a very debatable topic. I think there will be more questions from our audience about your presentation.
So there was a question you said, I see on the chat, but maybe the person can just ask if it's okay.
Ken,
yeah.
You can unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Kin. I do some research on accounting. I'm still yet to do my PhD. I'm a research professional at the University of Chicago Booth now, but I'm from Ghana. And whilst in Ghana, I've been doing a lot around, and I've been following you, Prof. Charles Show. I'm concerned because I just submitted a book chapter for a UN book contribution where I tried to look at the ESG. And in writing the book chapter, I actually interchanged. I used the ESG and sustainability interchangeably, although I tried to look at the double materiality and then single materiality issues also. But then I saw some of your posts on LinkedIn, and I saw that there was a concern. But the book is already out. I agree perfectly that what's the difference when we are focusing on the investor as the end user of the reports, as compared to when we are looking at different stakeholders. And the broader view that consider the double materiality will always need to look at the broader stakeholders. And the IFRS and now the ISSB is looking at the investor focus. But what I'm asking is that when we say ESG, are we looking at, I'm trying to ask that, is it more of a normative question so that we'll say that ESG, so maybe the researchers that are saying that ESG is equal to sustainability are saying that to me that ESG is supposed to drive the firms to be really, really sustainable. However, the indices they are developing because of the fund management related stuffs are not things that are, they do not match directly with sustainability. Or I would say that when a firm is, because the word ESG is coming from, the acronym is coming from environmental, social, and governance. And we can broaden all of this to match all the various components of sustainability. So that's where I'm trying to, is it more of normative that, yeah, I'm saying that it is not equal to sustainability because currently the ESG practices are not sustainable, and the data shows that the firms that have good statistics on ESG are not sustainable, as compared to me saying that sustainability is equal to ESG, because firms, if the measures for the ESG are correct, then we should be able to have sustainability equal to ESG. I don't know whether I was able to explain it, but that's the logic behind. And actually, I felt sad about 4 months ago. I felt sad when I saw your post, and then I already submitted my manuscript and it's going. And I felt that I wish I could actually do something about it. At least if there could be some clarity notes, I couldn't do that. So, but I wanted your view directly on it.
Oh, great. No, it's interesting. For the thing you've done in your book, you're not the only one, to reassure you, kind of unfortunately, because it's a matter of also getting a bit of a background and knowledge, and it's okay. You can always write a piece that kind of comment on your own chapter later on and say, hey, you know, I'm whatever. But you're not the only one who interchanges all the time ESG sustainability, so you know, don't feel so bad. On your question about normative, so I don't know if it's about normative or not. I think that the fundamental way that ESG was, I don't want to say designed, but you know, come up with this mindset is, it's still a matter of perspective, and who is it important or material to. So ESG by definition, okay, you can also, people make an analogy between social, environmental, well, not in this order, SE, and financial, right? The pillar of sustainability in general, you have to have the three components, okay, social, environmental, and economic or financial, right? You could argue that this is sustainability. The problem is not about necessarily even the wording or the fact that they have these three letters. It's that these ESG strategies and the ESG reporting undertaken by firms recently has only taken into consideration that the only one that we should really focus on is the business. So how, again, is ESG issues? So let's talk about climate-based catastrophic events, right? Hurricanes and you name it, like in the earthquake, you can argue, but like, for example, tsunamis, and these are formed because of climate issues. So how those issues, or modern slavery, human rights issues and social, right? You have all these controversial issues of that. How these problems that companies actually create, we know that they're the one who are creating, how is this going to come back to us and affect the value of my firm? And this is where the difference is, where the practice that they do goes back to remember the question I said earlier, does it pay to be green? So if we put out ESG initiative and strategy out there, is it going to help me increase or maintain my bottom line financially? And the problem with ESG, the way that they define it, is that that's really the only purpose. It is not about trying to reduce the impact that you are creating climate issues, right? Because they are polluting crazy, they are building plants, they are, you know, producing oil, they are doing all these. But how to address those? Some firms recently explicitly said, we're not going to do that. So that, to me, it's nothing about social, environmental, planetary issues. It's really about just them. It's a very selfish view, in fact, right? It's a very egocentric, self-centered view of saying that I just want to make sure that when there are problems of social and environmental problem in the world, it doesn't affect me. I don't want to lose money because of that. That's exactly what ESG is. And this is the problem. So whether that's a normative issue or not, no, I think it's more a perspective issue, a conceptualization issue of looking at the two parties, like the graph I showed you earlier in the slides, to see what is important for whom, right? That's what I think it's problematic. And that's what people, I think, don't understand until hopefully somebody in this kind of talk raised the issues, and they go, oh yeah, hopefully some of you have understood that way. So I don't know if I answer your question properly, but about is it normative or not, that I'm not gonna be sure, but what I'm told you exactly just a few seconds ago, that's my view. So, and by the way, I happen to be going to Ghana soon, so I look forward to that. So yeah,
try to see how we can. But currently I'm in the US, but we'll see how it goes. I'll be in touch. I'll chat to you and then we'll engage more. Thank you.
Yeah. But you reach me out on LinkedIn or on email, no problem. Yeah.
Thank you, King, for the question, and thank you, Charles, for sharing. We have another question from our audience. Nga?
Hi. Actually, I don't have any question, but I just want to have something to share regarding to the question of King. When you say something about what is really sustainable finance and CSR and ESG or something like this. So there one new published paper on Journal of Finance, it's called Sustainable Finance. And in this paper, it also gives us a really clear definition and the difference between what is CSR, what is ESG, and what is SRI, social responsibility investing. So it also classifies the motivation, like the values and values with S, motivation, performance of investor to pursue sustainable finance. So I think that maybe you can take a look at this. And
for finance, I know there's a few. I mean, I think that obviously there's a finance colleague or finance specialist here. My view is that as long as you are going, just like Tariq Fancy said, only as a BlackRock, if your ultimate goal is to still make the same profits, right? The same returns, which is usually the maximization of returns, then whatever you say about social impact and social, whatever you call impact investing, SRI, all of this is BS, because that comes at a cost. I had a chat a couple of years ago with one of our alumni who did a brilliant MBA plus JD, a lawyer, and she was working for one of the prestigious firms here in Toronto. And the fact she said, I explained that, and she said, that's expensive. And I was like, whoever said that was cheap to do sustainable finance? It has to cost you your return. Instead of making 28% return, well, you have to accept that you're making only 18, and you're going to be more sustainable. But in the mindset of financial investors and brokers, and no, we want to keep the same return, but now we're going to be sustainable. Well, you can't. Sorry, you cannot have everything. Okay, so if you want to be real social responsible investment, you're going to invest in firms that are lower returns, but they're more social responsible. And until you accept a lower return, which is probably against all the finance Bible statements that you have to maximize your profits, then there's no such thing as SRI. I'm sorry. Okay, so you have to be able to pull out your funds from ExxonMobil and put it in some startup company with clean energy, which may give you a lower return. And that's it. For me, it's as simple as that. Yes, SRI is expensive, which means it's costly. Yes, it's not, instead of making this huge amount of return from an oil and gas company, well, no, you're gonna make a lower return, but at least you'll feel better because you have a social responsible investment. So that's the thing, right? And I know I'm talking to some finance colleagues and they're thinking, wow, but that's it. Because the way that we have the model, the capitalist stock market, capital market model that we have created, humans have created, have only done from a Milton Friedman perspective, is like you only have to make profits and you don't have to worry about anything else, basically, as long as it's illegal, blah, 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 right? So I'm maybe sound radical here, but even when you have somebody like Tariq Fancy who comes out, he says there was nothing social impact here, we just call it social investment, that tells you a lot. And the guy stepped down from this position, right? He said, there's no point here. This is a bunch of bull, right? So anyway, that's my reaction to the finance question. Yeah, sorry.
No, actually, your view is completely true. Yeah. In this paper, they also classify how to follow, how to pursue sustainable finance. Sometimes you need to sacrifice your financial benefit to go with it. Yeah.
Sacrifice is a good word. Yeah, forego opportunities to forego, but the model will tell you that we have to make the same return as last year, and then yeah, that's the thing.
That's true. Thank you.
Thank you, Nga.
I also have a question on the ISSB's new standard. I've worked in policy, and I think sometimes academics should be able to rant if that's how we should call it. And I think it's a good thing that you try to look at the issues in this way, and actually to look at the issues in from this kind of policy aspect. But my question is that, what do you suggest should be done, and what should the IFRS do with regards to this? Because it looks like they are trying to stretch to see if they can, by all means, create a standard to standardize the way the reporting is done. And I read recently, now they have also taken over the TFC, was it
TCFD? Yeah, TCFD. Yeah.
So they are taking the responsibility. So it looks like over time there could be, what could be done at this instance from your view?
Well, unfortunately, when you have such a powerful institution, such as the IFRS Foundation, it's like the classic David Goliath battle, where you have this, very big, powerful, resourceful organization who, in my view, did it for also some political power reasons. And you have people like us who are an individual and sometimes as a group of scholars or other activists or whatever. But what can we do? I don't know, except to keep denouncing and reporting, but I'm not sure where we'll lead. But what if there is a chance that IFRS might change something, is to reverse the standards or update the standard and say, well, we're going to include double material perspective. That would really make people a lot happier, in my view. And I think the next standard, the next S3, from what I heard, is going to be more on these human rights or these social issues, which is good. But it's going to keep having this investor-focused perspective. So, unfortunately, I don't want to sound too defeatist. I know that in terms of what my students, because I'm a professor at a business school, to teach them, they will know about it. They can take it or leave it. I don't can force them to believe in certain things, but I will provide them. And so my job, in my view, what I could do is through teaching, through this kind of webinar, seminar, the presentations, or everything I can, and sometimes engage with some practitioners to convince them that it's not. And I have done that, and I think it's just a small steps. Not saying that you're going to change the world like that, but if you don't do anything, then nothing's going to happen. So, yeah, but ISSB has become, it's just way too powerful. I mean, you're talking about a international organization who has a huge jurisdiction and authority of accounting standards in the world. And I keep saying it's a political thing. So here's my view on the whole picture between Europe. So, as I mentioned, the IFRS Foundation, the ISB, did not have much, almost nothing on sustainability standard, right? And suddenly in 2020 they came. This is at a time where Europe is developing the directive on non-financial reporting, right? This is in process, right? They work really hard, and EFRAG is pushing this. And for me, it was, the way I look at it, and I don't have evidence, but it's pretty clear to me that, they were the masters of financial reporting standards, and they thought, no, we should not let another organization in Europe separate from us do the system standard. So we have to get into it. This is why it was such a rushed, lousy paper in 2020 without knowing they just put this out there. To me, I can only explain why, because this paper came out of nowhere, absolutely nowhere. There was just like, boom, all of a sudden. And this is where it started. So for me, there was an agenda behind it. I could be wrong, but for me, I don't see other reason or rationale. And they achieved that because they respected so-called the consultation process. They said, okay, stakeholder feedback. We know that they are usually very selective, and those feedback, it can mean everything or nothing for them. And then at the end, after 3 years, less than 3 years, they issued the first standards, 2020, September, and June 2023, right? This whole process was completely planned. So that's kind of my take on the power. This is how they work, right? This institution is very political, if you think about it, right? So.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I think due to the time, so sorry, we had to come to the end of our webinar. Once again, thank you very much, Professor Cho, for sharing your interesting topics on the topic of the ESG and sustainability. And also thank you everyone for joining our webinar and sharing your thoughts about the topic as well. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And as I said, I invite you to get in touch with me if you want to discuss, have questions and stuff. So thank you again for having me. It was great.